You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. The topic of the day is vernacular photography, or as many of us call them, old snapshots. Truth is, who hasn't pored over stacks of sepia prints or old photomat squares at flea markets and wondered who the subjects were and what the photographer was thinking at the time and why, for gosh sakes, did the clown shoot into the sun? These photos tell us lost stories, often with humor, sometimes mundanely, but they represent the people, places, and social occasions we've all experienced in one form or another. We love them because they are often anonymous and because we can make them ours and tell the stories anew. But to speak intelligently on the subject, let's welcome our guests on today's show. First up is Peter Cohen. Peter is a New York-based collector of vernacular photographs. Starting at flea markets, Cohen's collection has grown to include more than 60,000 photographs organized into 130 categories. Peter's archive spans much of the 20th century and encompasses different processes and formats, including gelatin silver prints, cyanotypes, hand-tinted photos, Polaroids, real photo postcards, and complete photo albums. And the weird part is he lives with this entire collection in a 600 square foot studio apartment in Manhattan. No, that part I made up. Now, Cohen has donated significant portions of his archive to about 40 museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, MoMA, Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Morgan Library, and San Francisco MoMA. We also welcome back to the show Bill Shapiro. Bill served as the editor-in-chief of Life, the legendary photo magazine, and was the founding editor-in-chief of Life.com. He's the author of several books, including Gus Me, a children's book he co-wrote with Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, a fine art photography curator, a consultant to photographers, and a contributing editor for Leica Conversations. Bill has written about photography for the New York Times Magazine section, The Atlantic, Vogue, Esquire, and others. Bill is also a collector of vernacular photography, and we welcome both Peter and Bill to the B&H Photography Podcast. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Pleasure to have you both here. So let's start with a big question here. What does vernacular photography mean to us as a country and as a people? What is it about them that we love?
You know, for me, it's the history of what we think is important, which I believe in and of itself is important. And, it shows us our values, our preoccupations. It shows us how long something has been alive in our culture. Could be same-sex weddings or, men wearing women's clothes, which some people might be surprised to see in photos, from over 100 years ago, or photos from 1900 with women pushing back against social conventions. So it's sort of a log of all those things that we deem important on a societal level. Then there's the whole personal level too.
A lot of silliness too, if I might add, right? I mean, because a lot of these pictures are you look at them and they're kind of fun. People were having a good time and they're goofing around. Most of these pictures were not taken under serious circumstances. Am I correct about that?
I think that's absolutely correct. And it's more prevalent in American snapshot photography than it is any place else in the world. From the time that Kodak started to sell the first handheld cameras in 1888, people started to ham it up for the camera, and they've never stopped. And people enjoy it immensely. I think the longest running joke in American photo practice is people mooning the camera, often with their clothes on, not necessarily naked, but leaning over and sticking their butts in the air. It starts in the 1880s, and God knows it's continued to today.
And what does that say though about our relation with photography? I mean,
I think it just says that people like to have a good time, and Americans were free and felt comfortable doing these things, and they felt comfortable hamming it up for the camera and showing that they were having a good time. I've traveled the world looking for snapshots over a 35-year period, and I can't tell you how many countries where everyone is standing just ramrod straight in their Sunday best clothes, and no one's barely smiling. So I think America broke away from that right at the beginning and has stayed away from that very staid presentation that other countries have their people do in front of a camera.
I mean, it's funny because I can't even imagine standing ramrod straight without smiling in front of a camera. It doesn't fit with what I think of when I think of looking at a camera.
Yeah, me neither. But I had this experience of traveling in Europe quite a lot, looking for pictures. And the further south I went, I thought, oh, the pictures are going to get more joyous. We're headed toward the Mediterranean. It's going to be a freer, more interesting, sort of fun-filled society. And in fact, it was just the reverse. Everyone is standing exactly ramrod straight. No one's mucking it up for the camera. And the pictures are consequently boring.
When you say fromage, you don't smile. So maybe.
One thing that did strike me, I just throw this in there while reviewing my notes and looking at the pictures, and it reminded me of a photograph that I bought at a flea market zillions of years ago, and I loved it and I forgot about it. And it's a 6x12 print. It's probably a contact print shot with a wide field view camera, and it had to be taken somewhere around the turn of the last century. And it was a photo, a young woman, maybe in her 20s, in a 3/4 length wool coat. It was obviously winter, and she's standing there in the center of the frame, centered. Full figure with a lot of space left and right. And she's smiling at the camera, and she has in her hands a Kodak Brownie. And if you look carefully, you realize she's standing on the very edge of a frozen waterfall.
Wow.
It's a great picture.
Yep.
But if you don't even realize it's a waterfall, you look at her and you go, wait a second, where the heck is she? And it's just bizarre. And these are the kind of things that I find are very just serendipitous about these kind of pictures.
I think serendipity is a big part of vernacular photography. Again, particularly in the States, but worldwide. Everybody likes to have an unexpected moment. And you don't really know what the moment before the picture was taken or necessarily after. But while the picture is being taken, people like to be spontaneous and present that to others.
Yeah. Maybe we can provide a definition for vernacular photography, because it sounds like we're talking mostly about images that people take of each other, friends, etc. How do you define vernacular separate from found photography or snapshots?
I like the very broad definition that Clement Chiraud, who's head of the MoMA's photography department currently, uses. He has a definition of that vernacular is anything that fine art photography is not. Mm-hmm. So it is hugely encompassing to anything. These could be rejects from advertising firms. They could be school photo pictures. They could be corporate IDs. They could be scientific pictures through microscopes or telescopes. I mean, just anything that's not sort of being created with the idea of showing up in a magazine or a newspaper.
All right. And do people collect every version of this in your experience? I mean, are you going to find somebody who's out there looking for, medical photos or photos of barbershops or whatever it happens to be?
Anything you can think about.
One of the exciting things for me about collecting vernacular photography is the pictures for sure, but also seeing the obsessions that people have. People collecting post-mortem shots or only shots with the corners where the corners of the photo are ripped. I mean, the categories that people come up with and get attracted to in their head, that's a whole other topic of study.
Yeah, it's virtually endless. I mean, I know any number of people who collect a specific breed of dog, not necessarily their own, but they collect only dachshunds, or they collect German shepherds, or they collect some breed of dog that has got their imagination. Because that way it's a little bit limited and they don't get off into too many strange and different things. But there are people who collect photos of absolutely anything.
How did you guys get to the collections that you have? Are they just themes you found interesting, or is it just that you have to kind of find a theme, or it's just such a large group?
For me, the themes often develop over time. Like I won't set out and say, "Oh, I'm going to collect photographs of people holding the American flag," but maybe I'll see a couple of pictures, a couple of solo images that really speak to me, and then over some months or a year, I'll feel like, oh, well, maybe this is something that I want to know more of. And that's how a category for me will sort of sprout up and take root.
My experience is very similar. I find a picture I like and then sort of make the mental decision, do I want to see more pictures that are similar to this or go off in a different direction? And if I want to see more pictures that are similar, then all of a sudden it becomes a group or a category.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to search for variations on a theme after a while. It's like, okay, so it's American flags. Okay, now I have two old ladies with an American flag. Now I have a child with them. Then I have a one-armed guy with him. And then you just keep going from there.
Or can I find an American flag for each decade of the last century? I mean, to expand on that. I also like the fact that old pictures are not just images, they're objects. To me, this is very important. You can hold a vintage photograph, you can examine it, you can look at the edges and see if they're bent or if they're notated or if there are notations on the back. And all of those things to me are very, very important because they allow my imagination to wander. Where if it's just an image on a screen, it's not as involving as an object is.
On that same note, I actually copied a little quote that I saw in one of the photographs. It's actually on century-old postcards, which I always look at postcards too, and you talk about notes on the back of them. And that's where it starts becoming fun for me. And there was one sample here that I read, which was just perfect. And the postcard was the postcard said, "Gruesome scene in Juarez, Mexico." And it was a picture of about a dozen bodies laid out on a scrubby desert floor in the shadow of at least 50 handmade wooden crosses. Now, that's pretty heavy duty. And what was the note on the back of this postcard? It said, "Friend Edith, how is everything? Bob." Now, that is about as good as it gets as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the picture's pretty cool, but then you look at that on the back and it just puts it into a whole other perspective. And it makes you wonder more, what is going on here?
Right. What is going on here is a frequently asked question when it comes to vernacular photography.
And that is what I love about it, because it just sets your imagination going. You know, why are these two people sitting in the middle of a cornfield playing cards? You know,
exactly.
I could start to write the story from there.
And what was in that satchel those two women are carrying up that sand dune?
Well, exactly. And you know what? That photo that you're talking about, which I wrote about for Texas Monthly, it is one of the reasons why I like to collect vernacular photography, because that picture to me feels like a metaphor. There's two women who are dressed alike that we can't see, hand in hand, walking up a hill holding a suitcase. And to me, that feels like we're going through life together. And when I see a moment like that, or we're getting on this bus together to take a new adventure, this Greyhound bus, that's the kind of moment that really speaks to me as a collector.
Mm. In the case of that photo, it's mentioned that it's also a well-composed photo, and hopefully we'll have an example of that on our website. But, you know, is good quote-unquote photography part of this? And how do you kind of jive these ideas of what we've come to consider a good image when it comes to composition, lighting, and such with what is a quote-unquote good vernacular photo?
Well, for me, the blur, the shadow, the odd crop, the people not looking at the camera, the things that we typically try to avoid when taking pictures today, that's exactly what makes a great vernacular photo, because it's human and it's us and it's real and relatable. So in my mind, in the world of found photos, you know, good is unique, if you know what I mean. And those errors are what makes the photos relatable and frankly part of the connection I feel to them.
Agreed. I mean, nothing is better than a great double exposure, which is very hard to do today. You have to, take off some stops. But before World War II, they were quite common. And they resulted in very interesting, almost surreal pictures, I think, that a lot of people enjoy. I think it's also interesting to note that Americans, when they got their pictures back from the drugstore or the camera store, they tended to keep all of them, the ones that were blurred, the ones that had a thumbprint across them, the ones that had double exposures. In Europe, it was the culture to throw away the mistakes. But Americans just pasted the mistakes right in their albums, along with all the good pictures, and
But
making
did
it, I
they
think,
learn from them? No.
probably not.
But I mean, to that point, a lot of pictures showed the photographer's shadow in the frame. The sun was behind them, and that's a very collectible category. That you see people picking up. Photographer's shadow.
One of the most, and then you also see professional photographers, like Friedlander in particular, putting out several books on that one topic. Because people love photographer's shadow.
Do you think he was influenced by these kind of photographs in any way? I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, but I never put the two thoughts together.
I do. I think that not only he, but many professional photographers were influenced by common vernacular trends that they spotted and then they wanted to explore.
Can we talk about the world of vernacular photos and the world of fine art photography together? I mean, do they intersect? Do they cross paths? I mean, even in the marketplace?
I would suggest that vernacular photographs have been, during the last 30 plus years, have been accepted into the canon of photography, in that more and more museums now want and actively seek to collect or have donations made of vernacular material, and museums are daring to show vernacular material in the same room, or in fact right up against a fine art photograph. And I think that the curatorial community is quite interested in the interplay between the two. I've often said, with not always the strongest proof, that amateur photographers who got down on the grass and shot through a couple blades of grass to show their approaching child as a giant, were as inventive as any commercial photographer out there. I think a lot of these shots that were taken and then spread virally through the community were picked up by professional photographers over the years to add interest to the pictures they were taking.
Something that I was thinking about is that you go to museums and you look at a lot of photography and even illustration and painting the same way, and it seems that a lot of these images that we look at in museums, they have the same kind of value and composition and seems to be the same aesthetic as a lot of snapshots in these vernacular photographs. But the difference is that they are huge and they cover a wall. And it seems to me that if you take a lot of these little snapshots, these goofy little snapshots, and you take them up to 60 inches across, suddenly they come very different. And I'm willing to bet that a lot of these little throwaway snapshots and these amateur pictures in a different presentation and a different scale take on a whole different meaning and suddenly are taken more seriously by some people.
I mean, I completely agree with you. And that's why I feel like when I have this little, 3x5 picture, that it is a piece of art. When the image is right, I feel like I'm holding something really special and really beautiful, if small.
I concur with that. I also think it's interesting that a number of well-known painters actually use snapshots and use their family or friends to act out and then get a maquette from which they could make a larger painting. Magritte was famous of having his friends pose, and the pictures that he developed were less. They were like 2 by 3 inches, but they became sizable paintings eventually.
And to go back to something Peter was saying a moment ago, I recently went up to Pleasantville to the Gordon Parks Foundation and saw a new exhibit that Tyler Mitchell, the up and coming photographer, has put on, and he has incorporated vernacular photography in the exhibit and shot photos and made frames to make them feel like vernacular photography. So he is, so he is explicitly using his fine art photography to make vernacular photography and give it that feeling of life and heritage and soul.
I think there are a number of photographers, Dina Lawson, Lorna Simpson, and others, who have started to use the tonality and the feel and in the scenes that show up in vernacular photography in larger series of photographs of their making. And I think that's a trend that has been growing significantly in the past decade or two.
I was going to mention Deanna Lawson specifically and the show that just closed at the Guggenheim. Some of the images were staged, of course, but like a vernacular photo. And actually, in some cases, there were a vernacular photo that was incorporated into the image itself, just
Yes.
Stuck right in there, so very interesting. And I think in one case, it was actually, slid into the frame itself, as we might do at home with a little snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can ask that question: why are museums ramping up their collections? And this is one of the topics that you guys had suggested. I mean, what does this reflect on our current cultural priorities and even on our reassessment of photo art?
Well, I think one of the really positive elements is that by collecting vernacular work, museums can incorporate images and photographs of people who are sort of marginalized in the normal photo practices that existed for 50 or 60 years. So you can have pictures of Black and brown people. You can have pictures of indigenous people. You can have pictures of people who are really sort of off the socio-economic grid in the hollows of some poor state and for forgotten people. Now, yes, photojournalists went out and found these people, but I would argue there were vernacular pictures of these people long before the professionals got there.
And I know you were asking about museums in particular, but there was a book that came out, I think it was earlier this year, maybe it was last year, called Loving. And it was a collection of, I think, 300 photographs that these two collectors it was their side fun passion project, of photos of men in love with men. And the earliest photo was, I think, 1860. And that's something that you don't see lots and lots of in sort of traditionally in the history of photography. And so, this was a way to show the long time existence of this marginalized community. And there was also lots of really interesting stuff and sort of ways to read those photos, which I didn't know. Perhaps, Peter, you knew about this, but if the men were holding an umbrella, it was a signifier that they were in love.
That's actually new to me.
Huh, interesting.
It's making me look at umbrellas a whole new way, I'll tell you that for sure.
I think what Bill is saying, though, it's the same of reading a Renaissance painting. There was always a code that was included in these paintings, or the Medici paintings that were at the Met recently. I mean, I'm not the most skilled at reading them, but there are all kinds of clues of what the painter is trying to convey in these paintings. And I think photography was much the same way.
All right, we're going to take a short break. We come back more on vernacular photography with Bill Shapiro and Peter Cohen. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back with Bill Shapiro and Peter Cohen and vernacular photography. And John, you had a question you wanted to start this half of the show with.
Yes, thank you. And thanks again, Bill and Peter. My question is pretty simple. I just wanted to kind of get a sense of where you look for photos now, where you look for vernacular photos. I mean, and of course, I imagine it started with everybody in a flea market or an antique shop, but how has that evolved? What kind of networks do you use, and what's the search like now?
I started exclusively at flea markets for the first 7 or 8 years I was collecting. And then in the late 1990s, I learned how to use a computer and found eBay. So that expanded my world rather dramatically. But over the years, I've also found collectors and dealers and accumulators who are willing to send packets of information, to send a packet of 100 or 200 pictures once a month. And I would take the ones I wanted to keep and send back the rest with a check. I have people who come in my apartment with a suitcase. You know how many vernacular pictures you can get in a suitcase? Quite a large number. And sit there for a couple hours during one morning and go through them. I have encountered people in almost every which way possible in order to get a broad spectrum of material to take a look at.
And I'm mostly a flea market junk shop guy because I love seeing them in person, and I love that sense of discovery and of actually flipping through and feeling the picture, as Peter was talking about. You know, these things are objects, and sometimes online, you know, you can't see what's on the back, or you can't see some of the. And so I really do like hunting in person.
I agree with Bill. That's my preferred method. But during the last 2 years with the pandemic and the shutdowns, there haven't been any flea markets. So I had to be a little more inventive and be a little more accepting of some of these other practices.
Well, I've gotten really inventive. When Peter goes out, I break into his apartment and just take his They're great. He's got great stuff.
Something I'm curious about, and I find that quite often you find wonderful photographs hidden behind other photographs in frames. When you're going through flea markets and you see a frame with something in it, pictures, do you like kind of peek in the back to see if maybe there was something even better that somebody buried for some reason behind there?
Yeah, the frame thing has never really happened to me so often. I agree that once or twice some terrific picture's been, pasted over in an album even or something, or let a frame. But I think what's more interesting is that sometimes you get an album and you're flipping through the pages and it's just one dreadful picture after another, and then something changes. Either the photographer changed or their mood changed or something changed, and all of a sudden for the next 5 or 6 pages there's fantastic stuff, and you get really excited about it. So it's always serendipitous,
Hey, Peter,
the looking.
Can I jump right in there? I mean, what would it be that will turn it from just a regular, because we've already discussed the fact that we're not talking about quote unquote good photos necessarily. We're talking about photos that maybe catches a collector's eye. So what might it be at that moment that will switch from what you've just kind of described as a bunch of, not good photos to something that really works for you?
It might have been a change in location. They might have gone on vacation instead of trying to photograph around their house or their surroundings or get off their campus. They may have gone someplace that inspired them, and consequently, their work is more inspiring.
So you think you can feel the inspiration through the image itself?
I believe so, definitely.
I agree 100%.
Right. And is this kind of what's at the heart of it? Is that lightning bolt? I mean, you're kind of looking for that connection through the time, through the ages, through the format that you just can't really put your finger on, but it's there.
It's there. Yeah. And I hate to say it, the opposite is that, some days at the flea market or wherever one is, you're going through just enormous quantities of dreadful stuff. I mean, just, dull pictures, no one's smiling, the exposures aren't very good, you can't really identify a lot of stuff, and you just have to keep going because you don't know what's in the next box.
Right. And now, Peter, your collections have gone on to be housed and exhibited in great museums. I mean, doesn't that kind of change to some degree what you're looking for? I mean, how do you incorporate these larger ideas now that, your collection has grown so big? And do you think about, oh, this institution might like these photos, or this would be good here? And how does that kind of take away from that simple lightning bolt of love for a great photo?
It does take away. Occasionally, if an institution asks you, we would like you to collect pictures of XYZ for us, for instance. And it takes away a little bit of the spontaneity, because I like to just buy any picture that really floats my boat. but if I'm looking consciously for one museum or another, and I've got a hit list of what they'd like me to look for, that it's a little confining as far as I'm concerned. On the other hand, I'm happy to do both. I'm happy to help them out and try to find material that they have a specific interest in. But I always find that when they show up and they take down their box, and I've slipped in a few other pictures that they didn't really ask for, the chance of those pictures being acknowledged by the museum is actually pretty high. They're delighted to get that sort of spontaneity along with a few specific requests satisfied.
Now we're talking about photographs that are at flea markets that you could buy for a quarter, $1, something like that. Because there are more people looking at these, and because museums are recognizing them, have you seen prices going up on these pictures?
Yes. I think in my experience over 30 years, I would say in general, the prices have gone up about 4 times. There are a few categories that haven't budged, and there are a few categories that have gone up 8 or 10 times. But no question that there are more people looking. I want to hit on one question you asked a few minutes ago. Some pictures, while they're not going up in price, are just becoming rarer. You just don't find them like I did 20 years ago. And I can describe one very quickly. The car pulls over to the side of a road, not an interstate, and the occupants get out of the car, and there are a bunch of saguaro cactuses. And you find 2 or 3 of the people in the car aping with their arms and legs the saguaro cactuses. This picture was easy to find 20 years ago. Today, okay, it's a $20 picture. It's not a $100 picture, but it's a $20 picture. But you don't find it. I don't know. They're gone, or other people have put them in shoeboxes and stashed them away. But that is my favorite example of a picture that used to be quite common and now is actually a little bit rare. So there are pictures that are disappearing in spite of the billions and billions and billions of pictures that were taken.
And I think also a category, and Peter knows more about this than I do, but a category that I think is becoming more expensive and harder to find are vernacular photographs of Black people and Black families, from 50 years ago.
Bill's absolutely correct. Photographs that deal with the African-American experience in all of its possible manifestations are the hottest thing in vernacular photography today.
Interesting.
And consequently, the prices have gone up pretty dramatically.
And apart from the content or what's held in the image itself, I mean, what about format and age and like a complete collection of images? Perhaps does this affect value, or is this something that collectors look for in a different way, or does it really just kind of come down to the subjects that you're interested in and the kind of idiosyncratic nature of it?
The quality of the photograph in terms of how it was taken and developed and so forth is one thing. The condition of the photograph due to storage over 60, 70, 100 years is a whole nother. There are some museums who don't mind a beat-up photograph as long as it's a good image. There are a few what I'm going to call, Sarkowski's disciples, who really want a crystal clear picture and the picture with no problems associated with it, including glue on the back of the picture that has come out of an album. There are a few museums that don't want to deal with those. But most people at larger museums who are involved with vernacular photography are willing to have exceptions for the things they're looking at and the things they want to include. I mean, I often think that bent edges or edges with small notations on them or what have you, or some residue of the corners that kept them in albums. I think the edges are a little bit the connection with the past. And I don't mind seeing them. And I think increasingly younger curators don't mind seeing that material either.
I would say that for me, I actually love seeing pictures that have been loved and touched because to me, they bring out the humanness. These things were not just under glass on a wall, but they were passed around the family or left on the mantelpiece. And to me, you can feel the objectness and the love that was given to these pictures.
There's a whole category, and Bill knows it very well, that we call wallet pictures. These are pictures that may have been folded in half and then or completely beaten up, and you can tell they lived in a wallet next to a credit card or a driver's license, and they were a treasured possession.
I also want to say one other thing, which is, you would think that a museum wouldn't want a photograph that had somebody's writing all over it. Peter has a fantastic collection of photos that just say the word me.
Ooh,
I saw that collection.
I love that.
That's great.
Yeah, and I discovered this quite by accident, that this was an American phenomena. You can't go to France and find pictures where moi is written on the photograph, or the equivalent in Germany or India or Japan or anything. But American women had a particular habit of identifying themselves, sometimes when they're the only person in the frame, but sometimes when it's a group. And a lot of the pictures that have me on the picture side are often they don't have residue on them, which leads me to believe that they were mailed to people.
You're cracking me up right now, because you just hit home with something that's very personal to me. I lost my mom about 1.5 years ago, and going through all of her belongings, I found some small books, photo books, a little postcard things that my father put together during the war, World War II, when he was out in Washington in the Navy and training. And he went around between Chicago and Washington, the state of, taking pictures of street scenes and different ships and stuff like that. And he would take these wide field pictures, and then he would find somebody in the street, one person in a crowd. You couldn't make out any features. He would, with a pen, he would circle it and he would go, me. And he sent out, I don't know how many of these to my mom. He just took pictures all over the place and kept making up, oh, that's me over there. And of course it wasn't him, but that's exactly what he was doing.
How very Zelig.
Yeah, he was very Zelig, and he was creating his own story, his own narrative. Yeah.
And also, there's another thing that that I haven't heard mentioned here, but we're talking about with photographs and age. Obviously, sepia brings out a certain age, and in early color photographs, you could tell almost what decade it was based on the kind of color that is going on in there.
Exactly.
And there's one picture that I picked up, and it was a gelatin print, and it was put onto a piece of cardboard, and it was about 5x7, and it looks like some kind of a steel plant or something in Pennsylvania, and you got smokestacks and all this real grimy industrial stuff. At the same time, the photograph is oxidizing. And even though it's a black and white picture, you have parts of it going sepia, parts of it going purple, pink, orange, and it's blending into the sky and the smoke coming out of the chimneys. And you can't make this stuff up. And it's just the way the picture's decaying. Yeah. And it's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous, right? Yeah. The other phenomena that I'd like to bring up, because I've been very focused on this the last few years, is that beginning around the First World War, people, the big photography companies, Eastman in particular, but Agfa and others, started to sell kits of very fine brushes and photo inks so that people could color their own snapshots at home. And this became it existed in other countries, but once again, I believe that Americans really excelled at this. And in fact, the ones that are really sloppily done and almost folk arty in their feeling, I think were done by the individual and people at home. And the ones that are really beautifully done and people sort of colored within the lines and they came out with a really pretty good color portrait of a person, I believe those ones were done by women who worked on a freelance basis for the drugstore or the camera store, and that they charged an upcharge of 50 cents a person, of 50 cents a picture for somebody to actually hand tint these photos well. And I believe that I think it sounds so simplistic, but I believe it's true. In our collective impatience in America, we knew that color pictures were coming, and we just were too impatient to wait. And it was the only way to get a color picture.
When I think of those pictures, when I see those pictures, I always think of them as being the first Instagram filters.
Yeah. It's true.
Well, I definitely want to get to the subject of, the future of vernacular photography in the digital world. But I want to jump back to something you kind of hinted at, Bill, talking about these photos being a treasured keepsake on a mantle. But, something had to have happened to that treasured keepsake for it to wind up in a flea market or on sale somewhere. And that speaks to me to a little bit of sadness, and I want to get your guys' thought on this. Like, how do these images, end up in flea markets, and how do you guys feel about kind of, I don't want to use negative phrasing here, but, kind of digging through someone's past memories and past keepsakes to kind of have as a collector, as opposed to a family member?
Well, for me, there's always this flutter of, joy or excitement when I find a great photo. And then right after that, like just beyond simultaneously, is this sense of what happened that this amazing photo is now for sale to strangers, for a couple of bucks in a flea market. And, what goes through my head is the fact that this person has been forgotten. Because the truth is, we rarely, unless we break up with somebody or get in a fight with somebody, or if there's a disaster, we rarely let go of photos of people that we know and that we love. And so I think what happens is 2 generations later, you have no idea who that little girl was holding the fish she just caught, or who the mother and daughter was. Like recently, my father passed away, and as I was going through all of his stuff, I found these pictures I had never seen before, including one of my grandmother as in her 20s, and she was gorgeous. And I'll save all those photos, but my kids won't, because they're not going to know half the people who are in them.
I agree with Bill. I think the pictures that were labeled, Aunt Esther or whatever, have a greater likelihood of being kept intergenerationally than the pictures that were never labeled, and they were just passed down in a cardboard box or an album with no identification. And then by the 3rd generation, no one knows who these people are anymore. They've just essentially disappeared. So that, I think it is a little sad. On the other hand, I think it's just sort of, the state of things growing older. And I think it's interesting in some societies, pictures, regardless of their condition, that is identified or not identified, are considered too personal to go to a book dealer who's going to sell them to a photo collector or a photo dealer, and ultimately to people like Bill or myself. Like in Italy, the albums that are not wanted at the time a family has emptied a house that probably was occupied for 2 or 3 generations, they burn the photo albums. Now, in Scandinavia, they wouldn't burn the photo albums. They would more likely keep them, even if they knew who the people were or didn't know. They know their relatives, and that's all they seem to have to know.
There is one thing I think about, which is what will happen to the pictures of me. And at some point, a couple generations from now, I would actually be thrilled if a photo of me ended up in someone's collection, even if it was kitschy or on their wall or whatever, as a reflection of how people lived 80 years ago. I think that would be kind of an honor to be.
You better get out and start posing next to a cactus, okay, Bill?
I'm on it.
Well, I don't know if you guys know that, but for each of our guests, we send snapshots of each other to our guests. So each of you will be getting, probably next week, a nice snapshot of John, Jason, and myself. And we just hand our camera, we hand Polaroids to strangers and say, just take a picture of us.
I actually have a collection of those that I've purchased on eBay, so thank you guys.
I do have one question I really wanted, because you're talking about, we're talking about people getting rid of photographs and choosing which ones we keep, and we don't know who these people are, we just get rid of them. Have either one of you ever been approached by somebody who saw a photograph that was in their family that you put into a show or a book or something of that sort and said, I know who these people are?
I have.
Really?
A couple years ago at the Morgan Library, the curator, Joel Smith, blew up a small, like 3.5 by 5.5 picture to 4 feet by 6 feet. And it was of 6 or 8 American sailors in their white sailor uniforms with the blue ties. And they were standing on a point in Yosemite National Park. And they were actually part of a program that dealt with shell shock during World War II, trying to rehabilitate these sailors.
Wow.
And a woman who lived in Richmond, Virginia, was visiting New York, went to the show, and she I wasn't there that day, but she found Joel, who she knew, and said, Joel, where did this picture come from? And he said, from Peter Cohen. And she said, no, but how did you get it? I mean, how did he get it? And he said, I don't know, ask him. And so she called up, and her name was Denise Bethel, and coincidentally, she was head of the photography department at Sotheby's for 20 years. But the sailor in the picture was her father, who had very, very severe PTSD during World War II and was institutionalized for close to a year at Yosemite. And she was just like, I mean, almost in tears talking about this, because there are not very many pictures of her dad during the war. And he survived, he recovered, and he went on to a very good life and so forth. But it is pretty ironic. And she sort of said, don't you have any others? Because at that point, I had donated that picture to the Morgan Library already, and I couldn't give it to Denise. And just 3 months ago, we found a second picture from that same series taken a few feet further back. But I sent it to her, and she used the microscopes at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. And sure enough, it's her dad grabbing a smoke, looking at his reflection in the water in Yosemite National Park.
Oh my goodness. What are the chances of that happening? That's amazing.
Not high.
That is amazing.
Has it ever happened, Peter or Bill, where you've come across a collection and you say to yourself, well, this actually goes beyond quote unquote vernacular photography. This is the work of an artist or someone who's kind of looking at their photography in a different way. And then do you have to reclassify it? Do you still consider it vernacular photography? How does that work?
20 years ago, I found some loose SX70 colored Polaroids at the 26th Street Flea Market here in New York City. And I bought every one the dealer had. He didn't know anything about them. None of them were signed or dated or initialed or anything else. But they had a real vision. They picked out one object within the city and just focused on that object. And there weren't repeats of that object, but they found a dog at the corner, or they found a traffic sign that interested them, or steeples in the reflected in the sky or something. And they were just absolutely exceptional pictures. But I had no way really of trying to identify who did them. But I can tell you, when I showed them to various museums, that my small collection of 20 of these disappeared like in 2 visits. I mean, everybody wanted them because they were clearly fantastic pictures. I mean, head and shoulders above 99% of the vernacular pictures that I encounter. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's just, sometimes you do come across bodies of work, occasionally even in an entire photo album, again, largely anonymous, but you could see that almost every picture in this album was well taken. And those usually are identified by curators, in my case, in a hurry, and they go off to institutions.
And will you separate that collection? And
no, if it's a cohesive collection that I recognize as such, I don't intentionally take it apart. And matter of fact, I ask very strongly that the curators take the whole collection if they're going to take it.
I'm glad to hear you doing that, because it could very easily turn into a situation where you have people that'll buy like old Fortune magazines from the 30s and 40s, and which have the most magnificent advertising in it, because people spent a lot of money on artwork for those ads back then, and they just cut these magazines up and they stick the ads on a piece of plastic and sell the ads for what they paid for the magazine, and it gets me nuts.
Yeah, I don't like that either.
I also have my father-in-law. He was in Germany during the World War II, and he traveled a lot through Europe. And after he passed away, we found a photo album that he put together, and he always had a Leica with him. And I never thought he was a very good photographer, but the pictures he took during the war, traveling around, were really quite remarkable. And this book we kept. It's in the family, and my
That's
kids
good.
now are holding on to it. But he was a better photographer than we ever knew, but we didn't know it until he was gone.
He must have been an officer because he had access to film, because film was rationed pretty severely during the war.
Good point. I don't recall his rank, but that's a good point.
Or if he wasn't an officer, he was connected in one way or the other, or found the black market, because the big problem of war pictures is not that GIs and Navy guys didn't want to take pictures, it's that they couldn't get film. The other problem was getting it past the censors if they tried to send it home. I like pictures that have censor stamps on them during the war and the immediate after-war period. Sometimes it's the most banal thing. It could be dirty dishes piled up someplace, but some censor had to stamp it and say, "Okay, it's okay to send this back to the United States."
And how much of the fun, and maybe there's two schools of thought on this, is the detective work and the research and like looking at an image closely to kind of, figure out what date it is and where it might be and to kind of do that homework, or is the anonymity just as much of the fun or equally as interesting?
I mean, I love looking at the details of a photo and trying to detective things that you can learn from it, like, oh, there's a car in the background, and you can almost see the license plate, or you can, if you Google the name of the restaurant sign in the background, you can figure out where this photo was taken. But there's been a few cases where I've been trying to date the photo, and I called Peter up, I sent him the picture, and he's like, oh, based on the clothes or the buttons or the way the shoes were tied, that's 1910 or 1920, and it's always so illuminating to hear from someone like Peter.
It's fun. It's fun to try to figure out the date or the place. Beyond that, it's pretty difficult. But there are a lot of giveaways that we all learn. Like, for instance, if I get a picture, there's a guy in the West Coast who sells snapshots in large quantities, and his specialties are cars. I mean, if I send him a photograph with 1% of the surface space of the photograph has a part of a car, his name is Darren Stouffer. He kindly gets back to me probably within 20 minutes and say, that's a 39th Plymouth, and with the model number and everything else. I mean, he not only knows cars, he knows the little pieces of cars. It's just absolutely incredible. So there are a few other people. Women's clothing is good because it changes all the time. So you can get with a pretty close year to when it was taken. Men's photograph of clothing changes sort of galactically, and you could be off by 10 years with men's clothing. So you're better off if you can find a car or women's clothing or what have you.
Does knowing more information about the photo then really change the meaning of it, change the value of it? I mean, isn't some of the appeal this anonymity and making up your own story?
I don't think it changes it unless you could identify a photographer or a famous subject. That would change it a little bit. But does it change that if I like the picture more? Not necessarily. It's just interesting to know that this was Rita Hayworth, or this was Harry Truman, or this was Franklin Roosevelt, or somebody.
If I can ask, how do you guys consider your role? I mean, I know it's a big question, but I mean, there's so much cultural history and photo history going on here, as much as you might even want to call photo curating or fine art. Obviously not fine art, but in that realm. I mean, do you guys look at yourselves as kind of cultural historians in this sense, or filters for this kind of people's history, or is this more of a photography endeavor?
Bill?
Thank you, Peter. I haven't really thought of myself as having a role, to be honest. Like I have a pretty good eye, a pretty trained eye, and so I like rescuing these photos. I like making sure that they're not going to end up, in the trash somewhere. And so for me, there's an element of rescue. I like sharing the photos on my Instagram feed because I think people like like seeing this and kind of get a kick out of it. But I don't really sort of have a title for myself like that.
And I think I have a similar feeling that I like being involved in the process of rescuing the photo and then finding a good home for it. I mean, I'm pretty devoted to giving away the rest of my collection over the next 10 or whatever number of years it's going to take, and putting them into institutions that will appreciate it and make it available for other people to see and form their own opinions about these photographs.
I mean, I think I use these photos for myself in a way from time to time during a year, almost as therapy. So as much as I'm thinking about it, for other people, as you suggest, John, I also sort of use it for myself because I find looking at these photos very centering, especially. Mm-hmm. When you look at these photos and you know that these people have like lived through the Spanish, the Spanish flu of 1918, and they lived through World War I and World War II, somehow it makes what we're going through now a little less oppressive. It sort of gives me the long view of humanity as opposed to a sort of what's happening right now, self-centered view of humanity, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think I always find when we look back at these images, whether it's film or photo, that everything we thought was new really isn't that new. So,
and on that same note, if I may throw in a little turn here, we're talking about photographs that have been taken for the past 100 years or more, actually. But something has happened in the past 20 years that's going to be changing all of this, and that is that we're shooting digital. We're not shooting film. We're photographing onto electronic devices that once the power goes, the battery dies or you unplug it, the picture's gone too. And we're using our phones for taking pictures. And how many of those are actually turned into prints?
Very few.
Very, very few. What kind of impact does this have? Do either one of you think about this at all? Because everything we're talking about right now is going to be out the window for the most part.
I think about it pretty frequently because I see the value of snapshots as we all know and think of them is that they were incredibly durable. They've lasted, as you said, close to 100 years, maybe even more than that at this point. And as long as they weren't near, enough moisture to rot them or bright sunlight to degrade them, these little silver prints in particular are marching along through the decades. But the digital stuff is not going to be kept, I think, because of three things. The enormity of the pictures and who decides what gets kept, because no one edits at them. The programs to keep them. I'm not speaking from personal experience because I don't take pictures, but I think that people are just overwhelmed when they look at their camera and see they have 46,000 images. They don't even know where to begin. Then there's the other problem that in terms of intergenerational passing these pictures down, to pass them down, they'd have to transfer a file to somebody. And they'd have to transfer the password, so they need to do it before they die, because otherwise people are going to get a file and have no idea how to open it without.
Or they're going to get an iPhone 3.
Yeah, exactly. so I really think that obviously some of these will survive, okay, but it's going to be a lot tougher, and I don't think people are going to have access to their family photographs, not 10 years from now or not 15 years from now, but let's say two generations from now, 75 years from now. I just can't believe that people are going to have access to these photos because no one's taking the time to tag them. No one's writing on the back. You can't write on the back. The ways that humankind interacted with photos for the last century and a half is disappearing in a hurry.
I read not long ago that I think 1.9 trillion photos were taken in 2019. Maybe it was 1.3 trillion. But, that is an awful lot of photos. And you have to believe that 99% of those are digital. So I completely agree with Peter and feel some twinge of sadness that photos from this time, will probably not be seen 60 years from now. At the same time, If you go on Instagram now, it is the biggest collection of modern vernacular photographs, and it is searchable if you want to by hashtag, by place, often by what people are wearing or how they're posing. So for the moment, if you want to see current photos, they're very easy to find by category. Will Instagram be around in 60 years? No, but it's something to think about.
No, it's a very good point. Very good point.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious. We will find out how that giant archive of photos will be handled in the future. I'm sure one way or the other.
Museums are already starting to delve into this. Mia Feynman at the Metropolitan Museum of Art had a show where she tried to show digital photographs, and I think it was successful. At least it was a first shot at organizing how people can pass along pictures and so forth. But it's not easy. And as Bill said, the quantities are so enormous. I was reading recently that they estimate that on a daily basis in America, almost 1/3 of the 2 billion pictures taken a day, or some number like that, are selfies, which I found just astonishing.
All right, then. That might be a good place to end.
Peter Cohen, Bill Shapiro, thank you so much for joining us today. This was actually, I was looking forward to the show, and I think it was even better than I anticipated. There's a lot of things to talk about, and you got a lot of things cooking in my head right now, and there's a few pictures I want to go dig up as soon as we're off the air and take a look at again. Peter, any kind of shows coming up, books, exhibitions you want to point at, anything you want to plug here?
Well, thanks. Quickly, there'll be a show at the American Folk Art Museum here in New York City at the end of January. And there'll be a section of the show devoted to 70 or so hand-tinted photographs, which Keith Davis, who was a legendary curator at the Nelson Atkins Museum, used to call the hand-tinted photographs as the folk art of photography. So they like that concept, and that's why they're including them in the show. There's also a show down in Fort Worth in February of a very large portrait show of vernacular pictures of African Americans, a couple hundred pictures. I think there's an accompanying catalog, and that will be at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth in February.
Well, let me ask real quickly. These shows will include photos from your collection as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Both shows, the photos are 100% from my collection.
Okay. All right.
That I donated to them. Yeah. And then Bill's seen this one book. I think I don't really do books, but other people borrow pictures from me and do books. And I want to give a shout out to Melissa Cantonese, who's is a bookmaker in Pittsburgh. And she did a photo essay called Dive Deep, Dream Slow, which you can find on Amazon. It's Ice Plant publication. It's been out for about 10 years, and it's just selling steadily. It's the most beautiful book of sort of a photo essay. And I think your listeners might enjoy it. It's worth getting.
This upcoming show at the Folk Art Museum put a smile on my face. Back in the 70s, when I had a little bit more spare time, I used to go around to amusement parks, Coney Island, that was one of my favorites, with a 4x5 camera and Tri-X, and I would print the pictures, and I would use photo oils on them and color them in the way
really?
I would imagine they would have been. And I love that kind of thing. Photo oils to me are always magic.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Bill, with you, what can we talk about here? Any good shows coming up? Any books? Any exhibitions?
Well, Peter and I are always cooking up ideas for books, so we'll let you know when we have something to show for our efforts. I guess the only thing I would point listeners to would be hopefully in the show notes we can list 3 or 4 of the articles I've written about vernacular photography. So that would be a good place to look.
I'd also like to mention Bill's Instagram account, his feed, which is wonderful in its own right. There's always some vernacular images thrown in there, but every Friday Bill profiles a photographer, and his writing and his editing of those photos are wonderful. So take a look, and we'll link that in the show notes as well.
Yes, we will do that. And again, Peter and Bill, thanks again for joining us. It was a great, great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
If you are a subscriber to our show, all we can say is bless your photo-loving hearts. And if you are not a subscriber, all you have to do is head on over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you snag your favorite podcast. Type in B&H Photography Podcast, hit enter, and every new episode will be delivered the moment it goes live. And you can always find us on the B&H Explorer website and on the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group page. My name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.